Hello and welcome to Learn Masters. My name is Sylvia Seres, and our Masters lecture series today is going to be about exponential growth with Jennifer Vessels. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
It's a great pleasure to have you here. We've talked together before and decided that we want to make this mini-series together. I'm going to say a few words about the series and then we'll get started with the conversation, okay?
Perfect.
So this is, normally Learn produces cases of innovation, stories of people doing innovation in a local and exciting manner. We have found that people need some theoretical background to better understand these innovation stories, so we've created our Masters series, which is really every Masters a mini series of 4 30-minute lectures in a conversational format. So it's not a lecture where a professor has a monologue towards a physical or a digital audience, but it's a conversation between two curious and enthusiastic people on a given topic. And the topic of our series today is exponential growth, which is the growth experienced in every industry driven by data, computing power, and networks. You have a background from Silicon Valley. You have seen this front row 20, 25 years ago. So have I, and we have since been trying to recreate a similar growth pattern in Norway in different industries that we work with. And that's the sort of conversation I'm really looking forward to exploring. We'll have 4 lectures. The first one about the basic concepts, the second one about your favorite examples, the third one about some tools and tricks to get started, and the fourth one will be a play workshop on the topic of exponential growth in a particular company, in this case, Learn. Sounds good?
Looking very forward to it.
Excellent. So then we'll get started. And my first question is very briefly, please tell us, who is Jennifer and why does she care about exponential growth?
Great. So I am a growth expert in many ways, having grown a couple of companies myself in Silicon Valley, also having grown a number of technology companies, including Tandberg, based in Norway, that I grew the international business for them. And it's been a fascinating journey over the last 25 years to really see the development of the platforms, the tools, the foundations that are allowing fabulous commercial, business, societal growth and change coming from Silicon Valley.
Very cool. So you live in Norway, or between Norway and Silicon Valley, at least pre-corona, and you have also observed quite a lot of Norwegian companies since Tandberg and helped them grow. So I'm looking forward to talk about the Norwegian perspective on exponential growth as well, Jenny. So so let's get started on our first lecture, and it's all about the basic concepts. So I find it very useful to also talk a little bit about the story, the history of the subject. So what is exponential growth, and where does it come from?
Great question. Exponential growth, to me, and from a Silicon Valley perspective, is the concept of taking a foundation and a good, let's consider it fertile soil, a good place to plant something, and being strategic in what you put there, having a lot of patience, a lot of persistence, and a lot of determination to do what it takes to really turn that fertile soil into something that flourishes and grows. And just like when we plant our garden, you put the seeds in and you wait and you water, and then suddenly it's overtaken with flowers and plants and fruits. That's exponential growth, when it suddenly clicks and everything just fits together. And when I look at, for example, the history of Silicon Valley, I would equate it to that example of building a flourishing garden. Going back in 1995, 1996, that period, we shifted in Silicon Valley, a huge shift from being an agriculture environment Silicon Valley in 1955 was orchards. That was the fertile soil until William Shockley, a researcher from Bell Labs on the East Coast of America, recognized there's a need to drive change in the world based on the work he was doing with communications, in radio technology, and some of the federal technologies. And he set off to go west and was really the first entrepreneur in Silicon Valley with Shockley Labs that was the core of defining semiconductors. And so Silicon Valley shifted from a valley of fruits and orchards to a valley of semiconductors, with that first open, committed, brave person saying, I want to create something new in the world. That ultimately spun into Fairchild and a lot of other organizations that build the platforms that today are the computing platforms.
I just want to shoot in. I read the book called Innovators by what's his name? One of my favorite biographers. He wrote also about Steve Jobs and Einstein and Leonardo da Vinci. And it's really interesting to see how we was Shackley, and before him there were others, and after him there were others. Some of them very eccentric, some of them hippies, some of them military people. But it was this belief that this data-driven computing technology really can and should change the world. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about Gordon Moore as well, and Moore's Law. And why is that relevant to this whole story of exponential growth?
Absolutely. So from those first innovators that set off and defined what is a semiconductor, lots of growth happened quickly through the 60s and 70s. And at some point, Gordon Moore developed and formed Intel. And Intel, as we know, is one of the leaders in semiconductors and the whole innovation cycle. And Gordon Moore recognized that with the growth of capabilities in the Fertile Valley of new ideas, new ways, making it better, there was a pattern that started to happen. And that pattern was that every 2 years, the capacity and the power of the semiconductor and the chip, the integrated circuit, would actually double. So for 25 years, we've seen this regular pattern of the speed of the platform getting faster and faster. That Moore's Law has been the foundation of a lot of the development of software and other capabilities based on this linear, if you will, doubling every 2 years type growth. Now, recently, and I'll go into a little bit more of the reasons why, but recently the growth has actually gone from that linear, doubling every 2 years, to exponential, because we're at a point where the speed and the power is growing much more quickly than doubling every 2 years. And part of that is driven with capabilities that we now have today, building on what we've learned in the past. Part of that is based on the data that is available to really exercise and teach and grow the capabilities. So it's been a fundamental part of Silicon Valley.
Yeah. So two things, Jennifer. From a mathematician standpoint, when something doubles every year or every 1.5 years or 2 years, it's exponential growth. That's the definition of the exponential function. So we've had exponential growth in chips and computers since the start. And that's the whole essence of Moore's Law. The interesting thing is that people didn't believe it when he said it the first time. And then we still don't quite understand why it's valid, but it's based on probably on this transition from the physical world to the mathematical world of logics, and then back again. And the interesting thing is that we have had 50 years since 1970 to today of this kind of growth. And if you have a doubling of the computing
Yep.
capacity per square centimeter or per dollar used to make that chip, we have now ended with a growth in power of chips that is so huge that it defies the human imagination, but also the human capacity to exploit it fully. And the only people who are exploiting it fully are the ones creating these very advanced AI solutions and gathering data from the real world through IoT at full speed. So I think it's really interesting how it creates this opportunity for growth, where we are now constrained by our own ability to understand it and apply it, rather than the tools, as was historically the problem.
I completely agree. And if I look at over the last really 20 years, with that Moore's Law doubling of capability of the platform, in the 90s, we had the vast growth in software with the recognition of the applications for the World Wide Web, going back to the beginnings of Mosaic, Netscape, that then evolved to Google, and the founders of Google recognizing there is a ton of opportunity to be able to actually reach society in completely different ways, and a huge investments in the software, which then led to greater capabilities that led to more utilization. The whole dot boom of getting more eyeballs, getting more people using, that created a very fertile ground of data that could be used to exercise the computing technology, that could then be used to begin to look at software and algorithms for machine learning, so that the machines not only can be the platform, but they can be the intelligence. And that really started this whole new wave of where we are with truly fast-moving exponential growth, way beyond what we can really take in and the capacity to utilize.
So if I summarize, in a way, the first really big breakthrough, and I think, by the way, the biography I mentioned, which I really recommend everybody to read, is by Sir Walter Isaacson. And, it all starts with Shannon and Turing and John von Neumann and these mathematicians who are then trying to make this computing machine, and then the radio and communication people that managed to implement the semiconductors in with the right chemistry and so on. But so there is the semiconductor and the chip and the essence of computing. That was the kind of first really big breakthrough. And then if we're thinking of this as an onion, the second layer that makes this very fast and very potent is the network capacity. So you're talking about the internet and the 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G by now, and our capacity to connect and cross connect and the cloud and so on. And then the next layer of this onion, I think, is also a thing that you just mentioned, our capacity to gather data from the real world through Internet of Things and sensors that have become exceptionally cheap and available. And so we can translate the physical world, the financial world, the biological world into data. And then now we can start manipulating this digital onion as if it was the real thing and affect the real thing. And we have more understanding of the digital thing than of the physical thing. And this is where it all gets very, very, very interesting. And perhaps the fourth layer, then, we have the core of the onion is the computing and exponential growth of chips. The second layer was the network and the exponential growth of the value of networks. The third layer was the data gathering through Internet of Things and sensors and so on. And now perhaps the fourth layer is the algorithms and artificial intelligence and the extreme ability to understand and manipulate and analyze all this data through networks and computing power.
Exactly. And that's really what is extremely exciting, is where all of those elements are coming together. And the AI is really the fertilizer that's going to help it to grow and flourish even more, as all of those elements can work together to make decisions, not only to observe, not only to serve, but to make decisions and take action.
This is also changing societies. So we'll get to our ways of working with the exponential potential in the next lecture. But this is changing our business and it's changing our society. Why?
Great observation, really. And it's both sides. Society is changing the exponential growth and adding into it, as well as the growth is changing society from my viewpoint. So if you look at, for example, some of the interactions that we have today with areas of social media, YouTube, ways people learn, ways people have managed through the pandemic, that's a complete societal change compared to where we would have been 5 to 6 years ago in a similar environment. And that's because the fertile valley is there, the computing power, the network, the algorithms to allow us to do that. So the capability is there. We as a society are leveraging that. And we as a society have learned, and we have indeed adapted to using technology in new ways that we would never have thought of even 10 years ago. The Steve Jobs idea of I'm going to completely change the way society works and the way people live, learn, play, that has happened because of the capabilities of technology. But by using sensors, by using IoT, by using deep analytics of understanding how people are interfacing, that data that's coming from the way we interact goes back into building new tools and new algorithms. So it's truly a self-efficient circle of we adapt to use what's available to us. Our adaptation is monitored and tracked and analyzed, and that allows for new and better tools, which is in many ways the way we can truly look out to the next 10 years being a huge opportunity for massive, massive change in society. Now that we have all proven that we can adapt, we can do things differently, we can live in a very highly digital world, we're well poised for that true next paradigm shift, in my opinion.
I think it's really interesting to talk about paradigm shifts as well. And I think we have a paradigm shift going on in Norway. One of the things that I'm really excited about is how, for example, when we talk with people who do fish farming, they are going from, thinking of themselves as a very rural, traditional sort of an industry to this super advanced 5G enabled, sensor and AI enabled group of people that are producing fish protein in a very sustainable way. Same thing I see happening in the energy business in Norway. Same thing I see in actually the recent developments in the oil business in Norway. And even more importantly, this is spreading into our health services and our public services in the country. So how can we drive this as a society? How do we take a proactive approach to exploiting this power of exponentiality in different industries?
There's a few ways to do that. I mean, the first, which is exactly what we are seeing, as you point out, is utilization and embracing it. Recognizing that the power of technology and the power of utilization is much higher than avoiding and staying away based on risk. The second question, which I think Norway has a lot of opportunity to learn from Silicon Valley, is how do you really build the business models and the commercialization and the way to scale it in a way that it truly becomes exponential growth outside of your own little silo. I mean, if you look at just going back to a little bit of the history of Silicon Valley, a lot of that growth from 1960 to 2009, a lot of that growth was focused around let's build technology, let's apply technology, let's research, let's make it better that we can truly change society. In 2009, in the financial crisis, there was a bit of a shift of mindset in Silicon Valley coming out of that period, which was let's not just build the best technology and get it to the world. Let's figure out how we can really build the best businesses that are truly sustainable through all kinds of economic and other environments. And so that's where the business modeling concept of how can we actually provide services that would be a reoccurring revenue offering to others on a pay-as-you-go basis, for access to data, for access to capabilities, for access to what you need at the moment. How can we build those kinds of business models? How can we really look at the value of data and analytics and structure that in a way that it's not so much the value in the product, but the value is in how you utilize it, how you understand it, how you build on it. So it's really a shift that I've seen over the last 12 years from tech for tech's sake to tech to drive business. And I would suggest in Norway, we're at that point where we need to start asking those questions. How can we really not only perfect fish farming, but how can we leverage that in a broader way, either through commercialization, new business models, new ways of reaching out to others, building on the platform, shall we say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what they are doing, Jennifer. And I think this is a very normal cycle in the sense that we need to understand the new technology, and then we need to find the right way to apply it. And it's when we start challenging the existing business model that things get really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think the change in business model here is not like, I mean, let's say fish farming or energy, let's say floating wind farms. They're not going to start producing a new product. That's what they do, but it's how do they package and sell that product. So things like, and I think the main change that we are seeing is driven by platforms here, where rather than selling hours or selling items, we are now selling access to services at a certain level of predictability. And it's when you go from having a product sales focus to a managed service sales focus that you're exploiting the power of digital platforms, which is then combined on data networks and computing powers exponential growth. So one of the really powerful platforms that platforms need to be big enough and have enough data in order to be relevant. So there are platforms like Airbnb and Uber and Amazon and so on, and we'll talk about these. But Norway has one platform that I think is, it has several actually, but one of my favorite platforms that is completely under communicated in its importance to the society is Altinn. So it's our public financial core platform, which allows us, together with our tax solution, for example, to have the world's most user-friendly tax process. It also allows us to fight corruption in completely new ways, and it is a platform for innovation in our finance sector as well. So I don't know if you want to say something more about platforms and why do you think they are interesting?
Yeah, I think platforms are really the foundation. It's building on, as you've said, the technology, the power, the network, and the interesting thing is what you can do on top of it. And so when you have this vast quantity of data, without going into things that break GDPR, you can really look at what are the patterns, what are the capabilities, and then begin to see what are people needing and how are people in society interfacing with that platform to determine where is the value, where are they getting the greatest value in accessing the platform, and what would be of value that could be offered as a service. So there could be a variety of different services that could sit on top of the data that's available within that Alton platform. One example that I'll go into in a little bit more in our next section, but if you look at Adobe, software company, very different environment, but in 2009, they recognized they had a platform of data of how their customers utilized their tools. And based on looking at that, they recognized people don't need to buy software. They need to buy point services at different times. So let's break this apart. Instead of selling software, let's sell access to services when you need it. So potentially the same with Alton.
Cool. So we'll get back to Adobe in a sec. And I think if people can manage to kind of try to challenge themselves on, what would be my platform, and what's my data, how do I turn whatever I'm selling today into a service, and make sure that people also get somehow a binding to my platform, so that they eventually find that living without it becomes too unpleasant, and so you have an annual recurring reason to keep coming back and buying the same platform access. I think that's when you've got it made in this new world of data.
Absolutely.
But I'd like to go back to your point about, passion for solving real world problems, because, there could be nonsense platforms. And when is it that a platform solves a relevant problem on this basis of data computing and networks?
Yeah, so there's a platform behind just about every aspect of our life and society when we think about it, based upon the amount of data and the interfaces that we each have. The way to really determine where is the business model and the value is to look at customer-consumer patterns. Where are the problems? Where are the inefficiencies? What is not being solved for people today? And based on recognizing where those inefficiencies are, saying, okay, how can I use what I'm good at? How can I use the data that's available to me in this platform? How can I use that to solve a real problem, which can be an inefficiency? That was the Uber example. Inefficiencies of getting from point A to point B in the middle of the night when there's individuals driving with openings in their car. That was a real world problem. There could be a lot of different aspects of that, but understand the market and understand what people are struggling with. Based on that, understand what you have capabilities for, and then use your passion to solve that issue. I sometimes call it look for your rant. What is the thing that you just rant about that makes you crazy? And why hasn't somebody done something about this? Chances are there is the power in the platform of data that people can address that. So look for that, be passionate, and don't give up in using the capabilities that you have to leverage that data, build that service, and take it forward.
Yeah, I think, and that's one of the areas that Silicon Valley, I think, is actually really good at. They're very disciplined in not just creating, a better cheese knife, not just about creating a more efficient version of a tool that already solves a problem, but they find the market failure. And when they find the market failure, they solve it through a platform and with data and computing and algorithms. And I think you call it a rant, I call it a market failure, but basically you need to find a real problem. You need to understand the size of that real problem, which is also your business model. And then you need to understand, who is suffering most from this business problem, and then go about getting the data and the other components of your platform. Jennifer, we have 2-3 minutes more in this first lecture. And what I'd like to ask you is two things. One is what the culture of Silicon Valley that makes this possible. I'd like you to say a few words about the pay it forward and collaboration culture. And then I would like you to say a few words about what can Norway do in order to exploit exponential growth.
Great. So the culture is really around passionate people that are risk takers, that each have areas that they bring unique skills, and by working together, and it's very much a culture of cooperation, knowing that at any point in time you may be competing for wallet share, i.e. for somebody to pay money for your services. You may be competing, but you each have a different view of a different problem or similar problem. And by working together, 1 + 1 = 3. That's the pay it forward. If you're doing something, I'm doing something, let's collaborate, because that way we can validate that the problems we each think are there, getting outside perspective. And by working together, we can build something that's even bigger. So it's cooperation, recognizing you may compete, but by working together, we make something greater. And that's one of the things that I find is often missing in Norway. There is a tendency to say, I have this great idea. I'm going to put my head down. I'm not going to tell anybody about it. I'm going to build a beautiful product, and then I'm going to go out and try to find the product market fit. From a Silicon Valley point of view, that's backwards. In Silicon Valley, we would say, I have this rant or problem, or I see this inefficiency. I'm going to go talk to everybody I can find to see if they agree. And if they do, then I'm going to get a few people to work together with me that share their passion about this, and we'll see if it works in the market. So we start with the market. It's market to product versus I'm going to build a great product and go see if somebody in the market actually wants it. So my advice would be to flip it. Think about where are the inefficiencies? What are the things you see as real problems? Who else do you know that shares that view? Start building something and go talk to more people. And that's a very good way of leveraging the platform that is there today to get to that exponential success. Start doing something with others.
And I think also kind of building our not just ambition, but in a way self-image, our idea that we could have a leading position in the world in some of these areas in digital. And it's really exciting, Jennifer, to see how this is beginning to happen. So Learn is in at the same time as we are talking, creating a series on digitalization and innovation in transport sector. And exactly because we can collaborate between public and private sectors, we are doing some data gathering, but also some data-enabled services that are completely unique in the world. Something very similar is happening in public financial crossing. Energy, some other natural resources, including fish, shipping. We have some of the most interesting projects in shipping innovation. So I think it's about also creating this national image of being a digital leader. That's very, very important. And I think we do that through celebrating good examples. So you and I will stop now for a couple of minutes, and then we will go into lecture number 2, where we will talk about your favorite 3 international examples. And then I can toss in some ideas that relate this to what we are doing at the same time in Norway. Sounds good?
Sounds good. Look forward to it.